Hello there, this is Jim the Keys bartender coming to you from the bowels of it feels like hell. So hot down here in the Keys in Florida in general. It's probably 90, 92 degrees. It feels like 100 with the humidity. But I know there's a lot of places, it's hot. It's hot. It's fucking hot. But the Keys are lovely. It was a beautiful day. I went We had a decent amount of traffic. We still have a lot of traffic down here. It seems like we have a decent amount of visitors, which we're thankful for. The restaurant industry and the hotels and the dive boats and the fishing boats. And yes, you can enjoy them. Just be careful out there. I do believe in safe distancing practices. I'd like to thank all our listeners. We recently had another uptick in listeners, which is great, and I never have a problem with that. I've been doing more live shows, so I'm going to try to set it for 1 p.m. so we may be able to get on a regular basis of maybe a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday thing where we can get the same time so people know if they want to call in, that's when they call in. But I'm putting a cart before the horse by putting a number out there and getting it out there. The number is going to always be 407-392-4563. That's 407-392-4563. Please feel free to call in when whenever, I guess in the beginning, and then I'll ask you to call in after we have done what we needed to do. But the way I see it is I'll just keep on doing it, and then I'll start getting the live callers and treat it like a radio show. And we're going to do it at 1 p.m. That's my commitment. And the title of the show implies change, and I think it's a great topic due to everything that's happened. Change. There's good change and bad change, right? And sometimes bad things happen, and some good comes about it. So that's the spin you can put on something. Sometimes horrible things happen, much like nowadays, like oh God. Almost everything. I hesitate to say, but the worst things in the world that happen, the worst things that happen, like the epidemic, it teaches the world that we're interconnected. No matter if they think they're isolated, if you do trade internationally, you're going to get something. You're going to have something come through the border, and we're going to have to deal with it on an international basis if we really want to get it taken care of. Much like 9/11, when we had the terrorist attack in New York, we had to deal with disgruntled parties that had a way of propagating or getting their views out there in the most negative way possible. So, yeah, it's possible to change, and I wanted to talk about that, but right now I wanted to get through the Keys thing. I went to the gym today. It was relatively, the gyms in Monroe County are open, and what they do is they check your temperature when you go in. At the gym I belong to at a hospital. That's also where I teach. Not currently, they're not doing any group classes. They have a small pad where you walk up to and the camera's on, and you center your face in, and it once your face is in there, it takes your temperature, and it checks to see if you have an elevated temperature. It doesn't check you. Eventually, I imagine in some future epidemic or things like that, there will be a system of being able to test someone rather quickly if we survive, and I think we do, and that because of change. But I went to the gym, You go in there, it's a two-step process now. First, you got to get your temperature checked, and then you got to, scan yourself in. And then in the weight area, they have a board where they have 10 people. You can have up to 10 people in the area. It's supposed to be 6 feet apart. And you write in the time that you're in, and the time you get up to an hour. And, when you leave, you take your name out. If you leave a little earlier, obviously, if it's after the time, you should be leaving too. And then you have this, the cardio area, which doesn't seem to get as crowded. But since March, when we started all our shutdowns and things like that, I have not been as vigilant about going to the gym. I started going to the park. Well, all the gyms are closed. So I started going to the park, and it wasn't my thing, doing calisthenics, running in the park and things like that. And riding a bike got a little tiresome because we kept on riding past the same things, the same neighborhood, riding up Route 1 down through the neighborhoods. We'll probably get back into that too. Maybe we'll start doing some evening rides. But since the gyms opened up again, I'm able to get back in my routine. And that is a thing about somewhat returning to normal. Now, talk about COVID-19. This doesn't have to do with COVID-19. 2 months prior, 3 months prior, 3.5 months prior, I stopped drinking on December 20th. And I had about a little over 3 months in when we started the shutdown order. And I had been sober previously 5 years before that for 7 years. So I remember when we had the first shutdown, I had no idea how long no one did, how long the shutdown would occur. We could have been 2 weeks to 3 weeks. I told you about a friend of acquaintance, they're also friends, who actually bought 32 handles, the 1.5 liter bottles of Tito's vodka. Yep, in order to get them through because they thought they were going to shut down liquor stores. I guess maybe they saw the state of Pennsylvania shutting it down. They thought they weren't going to be stuck. We are in the Keys, so if Florida had decided to shut down the liquor stores and things like that, there would have been, besides the islands around us, there would have been virtually a 500-mile trip to get to another place from where we are at the tip of Florida, on the islands, all the way up to get refills. And for the shutdown, being a newly sober was not necessarily a hardship for me. I was home with my family. We get along very nicely. We had a couple disagreements. We were cooking a lot, spending time a lot. We rode bikes. We did a couple things separately. Her sister lives a little further south of us, and it was safe distance by going to visit her and standing outside of her fence, talking to her. We do all sorts of things. I mean, when the Keys are empty, and they were empty because they shut down the stretch to everyone except people that worked here and residents, there's virtually no crowds unless all the restaurants were closed except for takeout and to-go orders, and delivery or to-go orders. So we didn't have a lot of large groups of people. Obviously, some people probably did have their small gatherings. Now, in the beginning, that was a very quick change if you think about it, from having a shutdown, a forced shutdown. And I'm just going to speak locally, and you know what happened to you in your areas, wherever you're from. About what happened to procedures where they put the partitions up at the cash registers in retail stores, grocery stores, Some people putting plastic sheeting with an opening there. I know places where I'm originally from Philadelphia. I spent a lot of years there in the inner city. They used to have more secure uh, the the little stores, the little corner stores in the bad neighborhoods, because they're prone to being robbed. They had small. Some of them had those partitions up already. If you think about it, the bank had it too. A lot of the banks you go to have these plexiglass windows, and they close the inside of banks, which have the plexiglass windows, because I don't know why they closed the lobbies in that case, but I guess you're getting the inside, because if people do have desks that aren't protected, so they didn't want people in there, just wanted to use a drive-through. So you think of all the things that changed: going to doctors, not being able to go to church, which is very important to some people, uh, and other people it wasn't a big deal because their relationship with their uh, higher power, whatever they pray to, is a personal one. And other people are used to big gatherings and in the camaraderie of that. Same thing with bars and things like that. That's a huge change. That's a huge change. And you started hearing things like, I can't wait, after a while, I can't wait until things get back to normal. It took about 2 months for the keys to open up again. It opened up on in May. It closed down sometime in April. So it was a little under 2 months. They had closed down the stretch to outsiders, people hoping to slow the spread, because Miami and Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, which still are hotbeds of infection. And I know there's people out there, not many listeners of the show anymore, because I try to stridently broadcast my views that it isn't fake, it is serious. And if you don't believe it is, then I did in previous shows, I try to tell people then they should probably be listening to things, their conspiracy shows, their QAnon thing, that everything is a conspiracy in the United States. That so we go back and we open up sometime in late May, prior to Memorial Day. And we don't have a very big Memorial Day, but we had a lot of people start coming down, because you had people who had vacation homes, and they invited their friends down because everything was closed up in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And they closed down again eventually when they started to open up. They started to open up. I know it sounds like circular logic, but at the bar restaurant, when it was still open, they're practicing social distance and all that stuff. We were putting tables outside the bar so people wouldn't clump together. And so they have to sit at tables were spaced 6 to 8 feet apart, so people weren't within 6 feet of each other. People would come up and say, I just can't wait to things get back to normal. And I thought, well, it's never going to go back. It's just like, think about this. In 2000, a lot of people, in the year 2000, a lot of people didn't have cell phones, though they were out there. And you had the Nokias and all that stuff. They were coming about, and they were on the edge of the critical mass of people getting cell phones. But people still had hardwired phones in their houses, and that was the normal. And the normal thing was not to have a cell phone and have a hardwired phone in your house. Come to 2020, everyone has a cell phone. Not everyone has a hardwired phone in their house. Same thing with computers, being able to talk on the phone and see a picture, do a live chat with someone, group calls now. That's the normal. So going back to normal, I think that has changed to an extent that people won't recognize it. And they may be angry about it, but it's just one of those things that are not going to happen again. Now there will eventually be gatherings going on where people won't be suggested to wear masks, because right now in South Dakota there's about 250,000 people, starting today, 250,000 people are expected. Maybe they'll have less because some people they may they may end up with 100,000, maybe under 100,000. Who knows? Because I think we used to underestimate the level of carelessness in people. Now I think we're underestimating the level of caution in even some of the groups that would necessarily go to Sturgis in South Dakota. And they'll be sure out there to be ignoring the social distancing rules. It's just for some reason, it turned out that uh, that type of gathering has become uh, almost like a political statement. When you make a gathering, and first of all, young people of all ilks don't really care. They have parties in LA. They're showing drone photos of these houses where they have over 100 people uh, without masks. And we do realize right now that there's a high level of low incidence of symptomatic breakouts among younger people, but it doesn't mean they can't catch it and spread it. And that's the thing. So when they're having the parties and they're propagating the virus and things like that. They're endeavoring. It's called reactionary behavior. Reactionary behavior goes you're reacting. You're trying to bring it back to a former state. That it can be done, but is it suggested to be done? No. Having a bunch of people come together from that normally wouldn't be together. 100 people, 150 people, 200 people. I saw 2,000 people in some place in Wisconsin. The Plat de Muerte or something like that. De Mort. I think it was French or Spanish, the spelling, which means by whatever table, flatland of death or something like that. And they had a big pool party or lake party there. A bunch of people without masks. Granted, you have people have died. Even let's say, well, if you have an underlying condition, don't expose yourself. But once you get everyone, you get a large pool of asymptomatic people walking around. You don't know. But when they blend in with other people, you don't know who's been careless and who's not careless, who's carrying it, who's not carrying it, and they're leaving behind little presents for people. Those are just the things they have to do. The reason why we have the mask is so not to spread it to other people. Now, a mask does help small, restricting it. They've just realized the valves on it, what that makes you breathe out easier, but restrict the air coming in, is so you don't have buildup of carbon dioxide. I understand that and all that stuff, but it's droplets. People said, they point out the mask, the virus is very tiny, but the droplets are larger. So if you carry a mask, you're restricting the amount of droplets that come out. Yes, they could have maybe 10% of them come out, and they could be slowed down too. So if you have a sneeze or a cough or you're breathing and you tend to put it out, it just restricts that flow of droplets in there that the virus attaches itself to. And then, people argue over whether it works or not, but eventually, like I said, with history, and this is the weird thing about history, that's the truth will out with history, if you're a student of history. Now, sometimes people try to restrict history, like they do in school books, to try to say that the Civil War was not about slavery. But if you can find your way around to find the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, you will find mentioned more than several times the institution of slavery in it, and the protection of it was the primary reason for the rebellion. So think about that change. We're going to change the Civil War. We had Abraham Lincoln got elected. You had states start trying to secede from the Union. South Fort Sumter, the rebellion started when they fired on a federal installation at Fort Sumter, and that was open shot. And eventually, through 600,000 deaths of Americans, we made the change. And even though people would like it, African Americans were freed, and they were emancipated, and they were given a right to vote. It took a couple of years to even force people to exchange. If you think about it, it's almost like the mask, because they said the war's over. Yeah, you have to let, you got to release all your slaves or free people now, stuff like that. They actually had to send troops down to Texas. That's where you go, Juneteenth. If you check that out, that they were for 2 years after emancipation, they still had slaves down there. After there were certain places in the United States that did not adhere to the rule that people could not hold slaves, and they said slavery was, it was part of their economy. And a lot of people will say that they would eventually have freed their slaves because of technology. And that's not a given, because it wasn't let happen, because there was a lot of countries out there, a lot of Western countries, they weren't necessarily democracies yet, that had outlawed slavery by that time, by the 1860s. France, United Kingdom, but Russia still had a form of slavery called, it was more the peasant system, or serf. They were like serfs almost in Russia. It wasn't until much later for them, but it wasn't necessarily slavery either. But whenever anybody says they'd like to go back to normal, they want to go back to a time where they thought things were better. Now imagine at this time, with this level of infection. Now at this time, I think there's 161,000 recorded deaths in the United States. And some of these people may say, oh, that's not exactly right. Well, I believe that's not exactly right, because it's probably much more. Because not everyone that died was tested for COVID-19. And there's people that died at home. There's people that died of respiratory distress and all those things brought on by COVID-19. And we had this discussion before. It doesn't matter if you have stage 3 cancer or stage 4 cancer and you're going to be dying in a month or two. If you walked into the street, got hit by a car, they would have listed the car as the reason, the car being death by vehicular, an accident, pedestrian accident or something like that. They wouldn't list that, well, he was killed by a car, but eventually would have been killed by cancer. Nope, COVID-19. And there's a lot of people that had less undercurrent symptoms, diabetes, a little weight problem, and things like that. So let's talk about change. So is all change bad? No. Well, obviously in the case of slavery, change is bad. Women's right to vote, that's not bad. Desegregation, there's an argument. If you're a segregationist, I probably would say, no, that's not necessarily a good thing. But desegregation was a means of distributing people across different school systems and across a school system. So you didn't have schools that were all black and schools that were all white, because they thought the resources were being not as responsibly distributed, and that people were selecting schools and teachers that were getting the better slice of resources were going to all white schools. So you spread out the people in order to ensure that everyone had the same thing, had the same level, the starting point of education. Horace Mann, who was the father of education in the United States, believed that uh, compulsory education and a good public school system was the hallmark and foundation for a strong democracy or a strong uh, country. And to this day, even a thought experiment, how would that not be? I mean, if I made the argument and said good schools and good students make for a good population, a strong population, well-educated population, right? A more able, resilient population to be able to do things and create things and be more competitive in the global market, I think most people would agree. Now, some people disagree on how to get there. The current Secretary of Education believes that taking the money and putting it to charter systems and stuff, they think that might be a wise way to do it. Now, the reason that public education, we did well in the course of the history of the United States, especially if you think about the things we did during World War II. And that was really change. That was a big change. Prior to the attack in 1941, December 7th, 1941, prior to the attack by the Japanese Empire on the naval facility of Pearl Harbor, the naval base of Pearl Harbor, the United States was in the middle of an isolationist patch, let's say. What Americans did not want to send their boys over to, and primarily it was boys, and it's still to this day that way, but there's a lot more women nowadays, but they didn't want to send boys into a European conflict. And they still didn't want, they wanted to be isolationist. Part of that isolationism was an undercurrent support for some of the reactionary regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Axis, and somewhat very minor because Spain wasn't part of it. Spain, Francisco Franco was a right-wing one, but there was a certain group in the United States of people that didn't believe we should have went to war with Germany. They were doing things they thought were good, fighting communism, all this stuff that combating the British Empire and restricting the the growth of the Soviet regime into influencing Eastern Europe, which was a bastion or bulwark against Russia. So you had Poland, Hungary, and all that. They were anti-communist. So the Germans went into these countries and eventually into Russia and stuff like that. The United States were thinking it was going on there was a hot war over there for at least a year and a half before the U.S. was driven, forced to do it. Much like we had to do force when we had to uptick in some of these states where they were open and didn't have masks. Some of these states are saying, listen, you're going to have to wear a mask, just like the president was forced to wear a mask. They say, listen, you got to wear a mask, even though you have everyone around him. He has the fortune, I swear to God, if he wasn't a president, and he had to wait 7 days to get people tested around him, and he didn't know if they were infected, he would be wearing a mask. And we require everyone to wear a mask around him. But since people can get tested before getting on Air Force One and coming near them and get those results in 20 minutes, he can go and shake hands with anybody and stuff like that. You're not going to see this guy just wade into a group at one of his rallies. If he does one of his rallies, he didn't wade into a group in Oklahoma. He's never done that. Really gone. He would take a select group of people and bring them into the Oval Office, maybe, or something like that, but he would never do that. So World War II comes around, we go to war. America has compulsory education, public education. We're able to ramp up the military at the time right before World War II, we had, and I am going to think, the 16th largest military in the world. 16th largest military in the world. Within several years, we catapulted from with. Just think of that. From the 16th, I think we were behind Portugal in a standing army. Ended up being one or two, if you want it, Soviet Union and the U.S. right there. And Soviet Union was taking on full brunt of the Germans at the time, and during in '44, they were turning out thousands of fighter planes each day. I mean, each month, and tons of naval ships. There was every day they were launching several ships. There are support vessels and warships and things like that, and we're training hundreds of thousands of men. There were at least at the time there was upwards of 15 million Americans in uniform. Over 10% of the population we mobilized. We developed new aircraft, weapon systems, decoding systems, sonar systems, and the Manhattan Project, all in the middle of a major war. The Manhattan Project, which developed atomic weapons. I was going to say nuclear, but I guess it's more appropriate with atomic. They're basically similar things. We did all that because we had the manpower and we had the people. We had the people that were educated enough to use the equipment and to work as lab assistants. We had a great university system, and we also had, because we were welcoming to immigrants, we had people that come in like Einstein, the actress, who was it? Was it Hedy Lamarr? Or I forget her name, but she there was an actress, a Czech or Austrian actress or German actress who was married to a Czech or Austrian industrialist who brought over, and she had an engineering background, and she brought over the ideas for pulse sonar that went into their torpedoes. So change happened. We were resilient enough in World War II to be able to bounce back. Now, other countries, think of it. Germany did. They had the willpower to be able to do it. But the one thing they didn't embrace with change, they didn't like to have women working in the factories. They had they want to have their women giving birth to children, producing. They had a long-term plan, 20, 30, 50-year-old, 1,000-year Reich. They were thinking about having all the women should, if you're an Aryan woman, stay home, have as many children as you want, as you can, to support the fatherland. But they had a problem with their manpower when it comes to factories. So they were producing pretty good while the Allies were bombing, but they were shutting out 50% of the resources, and they had a very well-educated population too. And if luckily they didn't do what would have been wise, was retask their women into the armaments industry. They tried using slave labor, concentration camp, and other people that weren't suitable for military, and they couldn't catch up. So if you look at the Allies, the Soviets, the Americans, the Soviets were using female marksmen, female pilots. The Americans were having female pilots ferry planes over to England. It was all hands on deck, and women were leaving the home to go to work. Women did not work before World War II. They did a lot of people. They did. Obviously, there were some poor women that worked in the garment industry and things like that, in the agricultural industry, in the service industry, but not so widespread in heavy industries. if you think of Rosie the Riveter, was a big change having Rosie the Riveter as a symbol of female empowerment and helping out for the war effort. And they would leave their homes. They started establishing more daycare, so the kids were taken care of while their mothers were at work, and they were out there working, getting out of the house. That changed after World War II. So all these changes occurred, if you think about it. And then, after World War II, we have the GI Bill. Now, big change happened in World War II and after World War II. After World War II, we saw a migration of people moving to the suburbs. And in order to develop the suburbs, they need to have homes. In order to have homes, people need to have access to low interest loans, hence the GI Bill. They, you had these young GIs are coming back from World War II. They were giving, aid for college tuition, low interest loans to purchase houses, vehicles. Industries were going, all Europe was torn up from World War II and developed the world. So U.S. was reconverting their factories to consumer goods, and we were net exporting so much, and we were being able to do that and be the bulwark against the expansion of the Soviet Union in Europe by putting forces in Europe and supporting their democratic institutions. So change occurred there, and we have the cell phone change, we have entertainment change, we had the women voting from 1917, we had the peace movement during the Vietnam War. All these things happen. Rarely have people gone back into a thing on the past. Now, there are times in history I can cite the Dark Ages, the fall of the Roman Empire, when the plague came around, when the infrastructure is taken out of a system. Some countries have fallen back. Greece, Rome, for hundreds of years, Greece was a backwater after it was the height of civilization. But after they were lost their power and the Romans took over, Greece became, Greek ideas came about. You had the philosophers, the library of Alexandria was burnt, things like that. In Greece for hundreds of years kind of fell back, but it did happen. No one, if I was Greek in, let's say, 1100 AD, I'd probably want to go back to what it was like right around 200 BC, BCE, if you want to, be politically correct, because they had a better standing of living, but they still had slavery and things like that. So rarely does going back to normal affect a positive change, because the thing that happened before wasn't necessarily the right thing. You think about it. In certain places in the Middle East, I don't know if they still do it in Saudi Arabia, but they amputate the hands of chronic offenders. And there's people probably in the United States that think thieves that steal should have their hands cut off. And I for one, believe it's a little extreme. But that would be nice to change. They can't currently drive in Saudi Arabia. Women, I think they may have gotten the right to drive, but I think they still have to travel with a male relative if they leave. So change isn't all bad, and change is about the things that make us stronger, really, in the end. The space program, polio vaccine, compulsory education, the right to vote, technology revolution, the agricultural revolution, they're all things that institute change. So going back to, I want to go back to the way it was. Yeah, there'll be a day, more likely than not, where we won't have to go out with our mask. That would be great. I love that. I love that. There's nothing, they're not trying to change it, but I for one have changed. Like I told you, I haven't drank. I needed to change because it wasn't healthy for me. It was my decision. But if I was drinking and then I was going out and driving and then running people off the road, hitting people, killing people and stuff like that, I would have to be stopped, wouldn't I? And if I kept on doing it, they'd have to put me in jail, right? Take away my license, put me in jail, whatever order that is. And that's a loss of freedom. What's the difference now if you're doing something that's hurting other people? Now you're disputing whether you're hurting other people. Like I said in previous episodes and stuff like that, they're in the 1800s, at a certain time, they didn't believe there was such a thing as germs or viruses or things you couldn't see that would cause you harm, and everything that would cause you harm was visible to the human eye. And then Dr. Lister came out and said, listen, he was teaching good hygiene practices, surgical hygiene practices, and deaths due to operations dropped dramatically. Then you had penicillin and things like that. So just because you don't believe it's there doesn't mean it isn't. You've been wrong before. I've been wrong before. But eventually you will see the light. Hopefully you'll see the light. But change is not a bad thing. I feel better than I have felt in years. I miss the conviviality of having a couple drinks. But my problem was I didn't necessarily know how to stop. And then when I drank, let's say I was being able to manage it. Sometimes I'm able to manage it. Then my health started being affected. I could drink. If I metered it out, I could probably finish a bottle, easy, bottle of bourbon a day, not get it behind the wheel of the car. Is that the way I want to live? Is that the healthy way to live? No, it's not. And in the long run, I made the decision not to, and that's change. And going back to the gym and working out, because my body's changing. Now that's a forcible change I don't have anything to do with, but the only thing I can do about it that's positive is to take care of my body as much as possible. Lift a little weights, do a little cardio, try to eat right. I did, sometimes I do have that kind of personality. I got this mint thing, and I would go through like 50, 60, 70 mints a day. And I knew I couldn't do that. Eventually it was right out my teeth, even though I brush my teeth like 8, 10 times a day. And that'll destroy your teeth just as much, wearing off your enamel. But that's neither here nor there. This show's about change. And sometimes change is good. Some people say to me, when you see an older person come in, you come in contact with them, it says, don't get old. And I'd have to put a caveat with that. It wouldn't be, don't get old, don't get decrepit. Right? Getting old is an admirable goal. Right? Being old and fit and vibrant. That's a worthy goal. So, change, I can say, yes, change is good. Well, Jim, what if I started using heroin and stuff like that, and just go out and do crazy shit, driving my car, rob people, run a couple scams, have unprotected sex? Well, that's not change. That's off your rocker. The change, when someone says there was a change, it's usually um, it's objectively speaking a change occurring. And in your head, if you think of change, if you embrace the change and think that change could be good, if you take it as a Darwinian proposition, that adaptation and improvement and strengthening, the, the to be able to adapt to new factors in the environment. There's a virus out there, a novel virus that wasn't present in the humans before, and it's hard to combat at the moment. But the change of being social, maintaining social distance, using a mask, washing your hands, practicing all sorts of smart hygiene on your surfaces and your items, that you have your personal items, just makes sense. That's a good change. And eventually, those changes will probably pay off in the long run. They'll look back and say, you know what? Because of the coronavirus, yes, we lost. Eventually, it'll probably be a couple million people because they're not recording all the deaths and stuff like that. It'll be, how many people? 5, 6, 7 million people they'll figure out died of this once they realize the people that died that didn't get diagnosed. But they'll know that any other outbreaks, when there's another flu outbreak or something that's communicable from person to person, we're going to be able to say, hey, listen, we got a hold of this. And we say we can do it locally. And if we can catch that spread locally, then they don't have to deal with it in the special rest of the state. If there's an outbreak down in Monroe County, we could do that. It could be in Ocala, Duval, let's say out of state, Bucks County, Pennsylvania. You just shut that down for a little while. That one county, the government can come in and help. When I talk with resources, not with, police forces. Not with police forces, but with resources like health, financial resources, things like that. And you don't have to do the whole country thing. So change isn't always negative. And change is good. And change is always happening. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. If environmental change happens, where we're calling it king tides and stuff like that, but we're having sea level rise. But eventually you're saying, well, no, it's not the reason. That's not the thing. Well, eventually the water's going to be up to your asshole. You're going to have to admit it. Oh, water's gotten higher. Where'd it come from? I don't know. It's an emperor tide. Emperor tide. Does those make up a new word for it? But change does happen. And it's dependent on the outlook you have with it. If you see it as a positive thing and you embrace it and you make it work for you, there's people out there, or you can see it on the television, stuff like that. People are selling masks, buffs, cleaning service. ServPro, a cleaning service company that mainly came after flooding or hurricanes and things like that, or they could come in after you had a local disaster, a fire, something to come in and get the smoke damage done or get mold out of a place. Now ServPro has this infrastructure where they can go in and disinfect and say, listen, we'll do a daily disinfection of your place for so and so amount of money, making it, they are right position. How about the grocery delivery services? Holy shit. Going through the roof. Instacart. Prior to COVID-19, we had some grocery delivery down here. Now we have tons of grocery delivery. And we have a population of people that are experienced doing the work. Is it good work? Maybe yes, maybe not. My feelings is maybe not. If someone were wanting to call, and that's why we have the call-in shows that does Instacart. We'll do that on another show. That change has occurred, and so has the Grubhub thing. It has expanded. Restaurants are doing takeout that never did takeout. I have a feeling that a lot of the times those delivery things are actually a negative thing for restaurants. But when I say negative, negative for revenue. It's not a revenue enhancer. It's a gross enhancer. When I say gross, it increases your gross income, but in the end, your net income will be hurt by it. And you'll see that with all the restaurants that are going to be closing, that it just doesn't cut the mustard. Wow, I went on. I didn't even talk about the. I'm glad I didn't talk about me all that much. We talked about other things, and I hope someday, if I keep on doing it at 1 o'clock, and then maybe I'll do the 1 o'clock on Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, throw in another show with a guest uh, on one of those days. But hopefully, we'll be able to keep this going. It has added new vigor to my life. This has been a change for me. I'm still doing this though, and I'm happy. I'm happy it's helping me, and I'm happy that you're listening. Please share this show with your friends. Become a subscriber. Remember that number I gave you. I'm going to remember it someday. You can call it during the live shows, 407-392-4563, and hopefully we'll talk in person during a show. Till now, thank you. Take care. Be safe. Stay healthy. Bye.